Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Did you want it this dark in here? Is this how you feel this morning? This is good. Keep it down. Well, I can't see you very well. If it's okay with you, can I put the lights up to the walk-in level, if that's okay? Because that way we can communicate. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. It's a little better. 85% of you, if you look around and spot a group of 10 of you, 8.5 of you are working towards an insights marketing or insights sales effort, at least according to our research. 85% of you say, we're doing insights. And I love that because at that point you're like, so what makes an insight an insight? And I think that's the big question is if we're going to be companies that want to share insights with the market, and that's how we're going to set ourselves apart, and our content is the vehicle to deliver our insights, when is an insight an insight? And one of the things that, not to get too cutesy or too clever, the question I have is, do they incite or do they simply excite? And if we're in the business of conversions, not just content for content's sake, we want to make sure we incite some sort of activity, some sort of behavior change, something that causes somebody to do something different tomorrow than they were doing today. Our insight is designed, isn't it, to cause somebody who was doing something this way yesterday to do something different yesterday and do it with us. The challenge is, that's easier said than done. Here's the stats about what it's like to cause somebody to change and choose you. If you think of the average sales cycle, and I'll make it linear, but it's kind of, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And at some point you come to the end, the assumption is that they're going to choose you or they're going to choose your competitor. But we've discovered that over 60% of the time, they choose nobody. 60% of the time, companies make no decision. This isn't no decision from those who raised their hands and you generated a lead. This is no decision among people who went through the pipeline with you. Your salesperson qualified them, put a dollar figure on it, said, we got a live one, and we're working it, and we're dog and ponying, and we're doing the whole thing. And we get to the end, and more than half, 60+%, said, thank you very much, all of you. We're just going to keep doing things exactly the same. We're not going to take a decision on this. That in fact, when you do this work, you win on average 24% of your pipeline. You lose competitively 16% of your pipeline. The vast majority of your pipeline decides to do nothing. So the job of insights is to incite people to do something. And if you're looking for a growth opportunity, the growth opportunity lives right here. How many years have you spent trying to take 1 or 2 basis points away from your competitor? When in reality, your biggest competitor lives right here, status quo. Now you might be saying, Tim, but they use one of our competitors, so it really is a competitive loss. And I would tell you that is not the psychology of decision making. So my work is in the area of neuroscience, behavioral economics, and social psychology behind decision making. And in the science of decision making, what's really going on here is that people are not in an active sales cycle where you're thinking, we got to tell them, why us? Why pick us? Why choose us? People are actually over here still trying to make the decision to decide whether or not they should even change. And even though there's an incumbent in place, the inertia you're up against, the enemy you're up against, the competitor you're up against, is the lack of desire to change. It is something called status quo bias. It is a real thing. Status quo bias is a real thing in terms of how people make decisions to not decide. And what I want to talk about is how to make sure your messages will incite someone to change, but if you don't know the design point for your messages, the starting point, which is the mindset of your buyer who's still over here, wondering, should I do anything different? The majority of them are here. And I've worked with banks and insurance companies who've told me this number, 60%, is actually low. They've told me that on average, 80% of finals presentations end in status quo. So all that effort, and 80% of the time after your dog and pony show, they just stay the same. And here's what you're really up against. It is not a competitor as you know a competitor. Status quo bias is going on in the mind and mind's eye of your customer. So we're going to draw an androgynous customer here. Be careful not to put any extra lines anywhere. and talk about something called status quo bias. And I'm going to think of them as like a ball and chain, anchoring and tethering them to the status quo. There's been decades of research that have been recently accumulated, and they have identified 4 causes of status quo bias. And if you don't know these causes, you can't create messages to defeat it. When your job is to defeat status quo, you can't just make this shit up. You got to have something to base it on. And I use that word liberally throughout my presentation just to spike your attention and make sure you're still paying attention. The first thing is preference stability. You and I as human beings prefer to be stable. We like to make a decision, establish the preferences for this decision, and we like to be stable. We want our preferences to be stable. And if something comes into our world, we're always trying to put it in light of our current preferences. You know how this goes, where you see something and it looks a little different, you go, oh, that's just like. Oh, that's kind of like. That's preference stability. You want to be stable. You like your status quo safe and sure and secure, and so you want your preferences established, the decision made, and then you want to keep those stable. Your messaging, if your messaging doesn't destabilize someone's preferences, you're never going to move them out of status quo bias. Do your messages, does your content, do the insights you create actually know the preferences of the audience and destabilize those? Status quo bias will win unless you destabilize their preferences. That's just a fact, and we'll talk about how to do that. The second one is one of my favorite because it's such a human, natural thing. Anticipated regret. Anticipated regret and blame. You know, things may not be perfect right here, but if I make some sort of move to change, this could only go bad for me. I mean, why would I stick my neck out? I mean, it's not perfect over there, but I'm not dead yet. This change management project that you're talking about, this thing you want me to do, that could kill me. So there's this anticipated regret and blame, like, yeah, I could really be a hero, I could try to change things, but people already project buyer's remorse before they actually do the deal. So they anticipate regret and blame. So how are you destabilizing their preferences, but showing them that they're going to succeed on the other side? How are you helping them see that others have traversed this territory and have made it from there to here successfully? They can too. And not only can they make it there successfully, they can be a hero as a result. But you need to help them with a hero story where they can picture themselves succeeding, because you're warring against anticipated regret and blame. I can only get in trouble for making this change happen. Over here, it's not perfect, but I'm not dead yet. Does that make sense? So this has to be part of your messaging. You have to consider it. The third thing that causes people to stay in status quo bias is the perceived cost of change. The belief is that what I'm doing today is free, or at least I paid for it a long time ago. So the way I'm doing things today is cost neutral at worst. If I change, I've got to put a new budget together. I've got to rally some people, so it's going to cost me money, and it's going to cost me stomach lining. There's just a huge cost associated with change. All the cost burden, all the time, the effort, the money, the resources. I got to get multiple approvers for this. I've got to get consensus and buy-in. You know what? This is free. I'm just going to keep working it. Maybe I can tweak around the edges and make things a little better. Not good for you. I stay in status quo bias because I see that as costing me something, and this is cost neutral at worst. So what you have to do in your messaging is destabilize some preferences, show them that they can succeed, but you also have to show them that the cost of staying the same is actually more than the cost of change. At what cost are you staying the same? At what cost to your desired outcomes? At what cost actually financially? A lot of people like to run ROI and TCO calculators on the upside of the change, but have you done it in such a way to show them the negative of the staying the same? This is just human beings. These are the people we're communicating with. You're not communicating with robots, even though we're in B2B, right? So at some point, you got to understand that the design point for your messaging better take this into account. Can you ask yourself, is my content destabilizing preferences? Will it move them off of their status quo and recognize that maybe my status quo, which seemed safe, has now got some leaks and some squeaks in it, right? It's not as safe as it once was. I can get there from here. Others like me have succeeded and made progress and gotten to the other side and been better off. And, in fact, it's more costly to stay here than to change. The fourth one is selection difficulty. Selection difficulty. The problem with most messages that most companies are putting out is it's hard to change when your stuff looks the same. It's hard to want to change when it doesn't feel like I'm going to get all that much different than what I'm already doing. Most people don't see enough contrast between the way they're doing things today and what you're recommending tomorrow. So that lack of contrast says, why would I take the risk of change for some sort of incremental improvement that I can maybe just get my current vendor, beat them down a little bit, ask them for this, do this. The current state and the status quo is so powerful that I'm looking for any reason not to change. And our messaging can't just go floating out there, thinking that our stuff is so good people just want it. I call it the Mighty Mouse effect. You go out with your message and you assume that your customer is a damsel in distress. And you show up, here I come to save the day. Oh, thank you. Oh, I've been waiting for you. I can't wait to change. No. In our minds, we get so fired up about our story that we think that they're going to get it. And the truth of the matter is they are firmly entrenched in status quo, almost a habit. Habits are hard to break. Status quo is hard to break. So selection difficulty says you must show enough contrast between the current state and the future state so they see the value in making that leap. You must show the cost of staying the same is greater than the cost of change. You must help them see that they can be the hero in the story. Others have made this successfully. Only 10% of your market will make the move that you want them to make before you even ask them because they're visionary. 90% are waiting to see that somebody else succeeded. And preference stability, you got to be willing to create a little urgency, light a little fire, and help them see that they cannot stay the same, that their preferences are no longer maybe as valid as they thought. So what I want to do is talk about 3 studies. And I hate PowerPoint, I loathe PowerPoint, but I cannot draw fast enough to show you these studies, so I'm going to use a little PowerPoint today. My apologies in advance. But the idea here is really important to get across these concepts that I'm going to show you. And that is that we worked with a Stanford University professor recently, since I was here last year, on 3 studies to literally test and prove how a message can be created so that it will incite people to change behavior, leave their status quo bias, and so that when you go to build a message, you can now look at your stuff and test it. No longer do you have to say, I feel like this is a good message. And then you check it with everybody who goes, oh yeah, this is a good message. And your entire confidence level comes from everybody going, that's a good message. There's science behind creating a good message, structuring a good message, a message that works, framed in this idea of how people frame value and make choices in something I call the decision-making sciences. So I'm going to teach you 3 things today based on 3 research projects I did with this guy, Dr. Zach Tormala from Stanford University. He's a social psychologist with a PhD in persuasion. I didn't know that was a thing. Now, the only problem when you meet with a person who's got a PhD in persuasion is you never look them in the eyes. Because you don't know, like, are you doing something? I mean, stop. One time I said, Zach, I bet your wife never wins an argument. And he said, we never fight. And I said, precisely. Right? So there's just a little something going on here. But he's a guy who I build the hypotheses. He tells me what conditions to build. He runs the tests with academic rigor and empirical support so that I can stand before you and say, this is what a guy from Stanford says. So here we go. The first one I want to talk about is this idea of context, the idea of creating urgency, destabilizing preferences. We did a study that essentially said this. What would be more persuasive? What would incite someone to change in our insight? A message from a bank, in this case, I'll give you the context, that says to your company, you might actually fail if you take money from us. Or a message from a bank that focuses on the stated business needs of you, the customer, and then responds with telling you how much value you're going to get by working with them. Interesting contradiction there, interesting opportunity to test. What we had is 400 people. We put them in a condition, 38.76 years old, 51% male, 49% female, college educated, sort of your B2B buyer age range. And we told them, you are a small to medium business owner. and you've had success for the last 5 years, but you see a recession coming. And you can tell a recession is coming, and here's your 3 business needs, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer. Number 1, you have slowing sales. Number 2, sluggish payments from customers. Number 3, higher costs. So those are the 3 business needs. And for that, you want to get a $10 million line of credit from a bank to get you through the recession. So what we then did is build 4 different presentations, video-based presentations, 3 to 3.5 minutes long. And we took those 400 people and put them in separate conditions. So this was a very conservative test. So we put 100, 100, 100, 100, and they each watched a 3.5-minute video from a bank. We told them this is going to be a bank who's pitching you based on your needs. And then we wanted to test the effectiveness of it. So there are 4 conditions. Let me quickly walk you through them. This is why I needed slides. Couldn't draw this fast. Kelly, can you do this? Are you ready? Go. The first group listened to a 3-minute video pitch that I will summarize in 30 seconds. It opened by re-articulating to them, here are your 3 business needs. So played back for the customer their business needs that had been stated, told them that we can offer a $10 million line of credit at a very competitive rate. And oh, by the way, we've been in business for the last 75 years, serving this community. Not only that, we're an expert in small business. Our mix here is more small business than average retail customer. So we have a level of expertise to help you. We understand your needs. And we call this condition the customer's stated needs and credentialing. A lot of pitches do this, right? You replay the stated needs, you introduce your solution, and then you credential yourself. The next group saw a slightly different pitch. It opened with, these are your 3 business needs. We can give you a $10 million line of credit at a highly competitive rate. We've been in business 75 years. We have expertise in small business, your type of business in particular. In fact, we have on-staff experts that are able to assess your business needs from supply chain to inventory to back office, accounting, sales, and marketing. And not only that, we will tailor our services to your needs. Not cookie cutter, not off the shelf. We provide a custom service. So this pitch, which was 3.5 minutes longer than that, was what we called the customer stated needs with value-added services attached. A lot of people pitch this way, right? You introduce the customer to the back, you play back their needs, you tell them how you can solve them, and then you start talking about the value-added services you bring that make you different. The third condition was a presentation the third group heard where 3 business needs were repeated, restated, $10 million line of credit, 75 years in business, but then a moment. They said, hey, before we go any further, you need to know this. 42% of companies like you who take money and a line of credit during a recession like you're planning to do actually still fail despite taking money. We want to make sure that doesn't happen to you. We want to make sure there are no problem areas or gotchas where you take good new money and throw it after bad process. That's why we have on staff experts that can assess your business and identify where these gotchas might be so that you don't become one of these statistics. That was the unconsidered need last condition. The fourth condition went something like this. Hey, we're here to talk about the oncoming recession and your concerns about your business. Here's what we want you to know first before we tell you anything else. 42%, in fact, almost 1 in 2 companies that take money from a bank like us during a recession still fail. It's not good odds. But we've done something to make sure that these odds are in your favor. We have on-staff experts that are going to assess your business and look for any problem areas to ensure that you get maximum results from the money that you take from us. We will make sure that these things don't sneak up on you and that you don't throw good money after bad situations. Oh, by the way, we have $10 million that we can loan you at a slightly above market rate. And we've been in the business of serving this community for 75 years. Okay. So you follow me on that? There were 4 conditions. So after they watched the 3.5-minute video, they were given a series of questions and rating scales. This is just a sampling of them. Some were about uniqueness and quality, and many were about choice and attitude because we wanted to measure what they felt about their behaviors and how they were affected. So we asked all these questions after we were done. So now I want to ask you, real quickly, by a show of hands, if you think about presentations that your company makes or most companies that you see, which one sounds most familiar and similar to the way you structure your presentations? Most of you, who thinks that it's number 1, where you restate the customer's business needs and then you credential your company? Show of hands. All right, so maybe 2-3%. How many think it's like number 2, where you Introduce value-added services to distinguish and differentiate you. Yeah, a good solid 60-70% of the room here on number 2. Number 3, how many believe that it's introducing business, confirming their business needs, but then introducing something unthought of, considered at the end? Okay, a couple people here, a little bit more. How many just go in there and lead out by telling the customer something they didn't already know and they didn't say they needed? Raise your hands. Okay, just 1, 2, or 3. Interesting. Now, as you heard me walk through them, and as you heard them affect you and yourself, when you think about which one won, who thinks number 1 won? Okay, somebody down here. Who thinks number 2 won with the value-added services? Who thinks number 3 won? Okay, there. Now we're starting to see some hands, more hands. Who thinks number 4 won? Interesting. So the majority of you think the last one won when only 3 of you raised your hands and said you're doing it that way. What's the friggin' problem? You apparently know what the right thing to do is, but you're not doing it. So it's interesting, as we listen to it, something really unexpected happens. We actually appreciated and felt more engaged, didn't we, in the one that surprised us and told us something we didn't know versus the ones that restated the things that we had told them. Voice of the customer research and customer discovery and diagnostics is the surest path to a commodity message. Because voice of the customer research is what everybody's doing. And then you map that to the capabilities of your organization, and lo and behold, you have the exact same story as everybody else. Because they asked the same questions, got the same answers, customer business needs. You have similar portfolio of offerings. Your story comes together, and voila, you have a recipe for sameness. Not going to break through the status quo bias at that point. So what happened? What are the results? Our goal, right? Your goal is to build a presentation that's seen as unique. Your video should come across and make you unique. Now, we're talking about a market that's selling money. So I want to tell you about money. Money is really commoditized. I don't care what you sell, but when one bank gives you money and another bank gives you money, it's the same thing. And when one charges more for that money, that's hard. That's a really hard sell. So what we wanted to figure out is, when would people be willing to pay more for the same money? Starting with the uniqueness in presentation, the ones that introduced the unconsidered needs showed a 50% improvement in people's perception that that was unique, that was different, that was set apart, that was remarkable, that was memorable. So if you want to improve your presentation by 50% over everybody else's, introduce an unconsidered need somewhere in there. Now what's interesting, though, is when you start looking at the perception of quality. This was perceptions of the quality of the company, the quality of the products and services. Interesting. The 3 first presentation styles came in a statistical dead heat. The only one that showed a statistically significant difference was the one that opened, and you guys knew it, you felt it, right? You just felt it. That was different. That was better. That was talking to me. The only one that did was the unconsidered need first. A 10+ percentage point gap or advantage. Why wouldn't you take that? When everything's so close these days, you want somebody to move, you want to make somebody think you're different, why wouldn't you take that 10% edge? Open with a compelling, unexpected, what we call unconsidered need, because it's also more persuasive. Again, statistical dead heat. Only one that showed an improvement in persuasive power was the one that introduced an unconsidered need first. So you have an opportunity to break through the status quo bias by introducing an unconsidered need. But only if you do it first. Dr. Tormala identified that the number 1 tool in breaking through status quo bias is that they must feel somewhat uncertain about their current state. In other words, destabilizing their preferences. Even if you replay back to them the known needs, the one they stated to you in the research, you've only made them certain. Follow me on that. You've told them what they already know, so they're certain they know what you're going to tell them. They're certain they know what they already know about themselves. You've created, in psychological terms, certainty, even if the certainty is replaying business challenges that they have. The only tool that opens people up to persuasion, if you will, inciting them to change versus just exciting them, is to make them uncertain about something. Is that making sense? That's your opportunity. Where's your surprising, unconsidered need? The thing that they didn't say, they didn't maybe know, or didn't fully appreciate the impact of. And tell that to them first. Something they didn't know about a problem or missed opportunity they didn't even know they had. Open with that, and you gain a statistically significant improvement over your competitors, and you move the needle on status quo bias. So that's test number 1. Test number 2 so that was context. Create some context for urgency. Now I want to talk about contrast. The human brain, the number 1 tool the human brain uses to make a decision is contrast. Because when we're in status quo bias, and we hunker down and we want to be safe and we love this spot and it's safe and secure, the only way I really believe that maybe this isn't where I need to be is if I see something else in contrast to that where I can compare my current state to the future state and make a decision. In the absence of some sort of contrast, it's hard to make a decision. Back to my Mighty Mouse example. If you come in talking about yourself and how great you are, you're forcing them to go, how different is that really from what I do? And so when you come in with your so-called solution, you're asking the customer to figure it out and infer. And what are they probably going to do if they live in status quo bias? They're going to say, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but that's like what I'm already doing. It's kind of like this thing that I'm doing. People in status quo bias have a lot of hubris and confidence. And they use the term like to your peril. Now, I have 4 teenage daughters. They use the word like a lot too, but it's a whole different meaning. But it's just as devastating, I gotta tell you. It's just as cruel and just as mean. Like. If a customer says, oh, that's like, you haven't distinguished yourself. They don't see enough contrast to make a decision. So we want to test this idea of contrast. So Dr. Tormal and I built a study. We looked at 2 conditions. A message for a new product that first tells you what's wrong with your existing approach, or a message for a new product that leads with your best, most distinctive, new and improved features and benefits. And that was the test. So what we did is, again, gathered, in this case, almost 700 people with the same demographics, and they watched a couple screens. One group was in the feature benefit condition, one was in the contrast condition. And let's talk about what happened. So in this case, it's so hard to put a big major B2B example together for a test like this, because first you got to get everybody really smart about that industry. So in the previous one we did money, most people can understand that. This one we did smartphones for professional users. And we told them about 4 really cool features and benefits. This new smartphone has the latest improvements that eliminate hackers who are looking to gain access through some of your applications. It also has an automatic shutdown that closes down unused apps, which usually suck your battery dry and improve your battery life. It has a new photo and video compression feature that means that you can keep 3, 4, 5 times as many photos and videos on your phone as you could before. That way you don't have to download them someplace else or go search and find them. You can keep them right there. And it has new high-resolution images and a larger screen so that you can use your professional apps as well as your personal apps on the same device. You don't need multiple devices. So you see, we put people in the position of saying, you're a professional, you got multiple devices, you're struggling to use these things, and we're going to pitch you on a new phone, see if you want this new phone. So one group just heard these features and these benefits, and we're about to ask them a lot of questions. Another group, though, first heard this. Hey, today's smartphones have been proven to be susceptible to hackers, particularly through your keyboard app. It gives them access to not only your data, but it even allows them to turn on your camera function and risk invading your privacy. This new phone has the latest in security improvements, et cetera, et cetera. And then we went back and said, today's smartphones, unused apps running in background are responsible for over 70% of your battery drainage. And this leads to frequent charging, frustration, decreased battery life. We have a new automatic app shutdown technique that will improve battery life and usage by 30%. You get where I'm going now. So then we said, current phones, videos and photos hog all the data, and you're often having to stop because it's full at the most inopportune times, and you got to delete things and move things around. Our new phone improves that by 3, 4, or 5x. And we said the current screen sizes and the resolutions don't allow you to run your professional apps, maybe like your CRM system or something like that, as well as you'd like. This new phone has a new screen image resolution, and it's been shown and demonstrated to help you use it for both of your professional and personal needs. So one group listened to the current state, future state contrast condition, and the other one just listened to the newest, latest, greatest features and benefits. And then we ask a bunch of questions in these 4 categories. Purchase intent questions, like what's your interest and likelihood of making a purchase? Oh, by the way, we actually told them that their current phone was less than a year old. I forgot to say that their current phone's less than a year old. Willingness to switch. Willingness to actually pay more for this phone than you paid for your previous phone. Your likelihood to tell others and your likelihood to recommend this and socially share the information about this new phone. And your perception of this product. Is it high quality? Is it an innovation? Is it a breakthrough in the market? All of these are things we want our messages to do, right? You want to go out there with a message that converts people. So you want purchase intent, attitudes, and choice change. You want them to become advocates, and you want them to perceive you as the innovative, high-quality leader in your market, most of you. So how does a simple tool like introducing contrast affect that? Here's the numbers. By introducing contrast, we were able to improve the likelihood of and willingness to purchase by more than 14.5%. Huge jump if you think about it. Now what you see are 1 condition, features only, and then 3 conditions in contrast. We ended up testing side by side, and then we did screens where the current state, future state was top, bottom, and then we did screens where it was screen 1, screen 2 in the contrast condition, trying to figure out how you should present this content. And there wasn't actually a lot of difference. As long as contrast was there, contrast was really important. The only statistical difference was between contrast and no contrast. Attitudes and choice, another 14% impact if you introduce contrast to the story. Not just talk about your new and improved features and benefits. Even if the benefit statements are there. Again, you're forcing people to infer why that's so different from what they do, and more than likely, they will, from a status quo bias position, prefer all the safety I mentioned, and they're going to say, that's cool, but a lot like what I already have. It isn't until you start to say, well, here's more or less what people like you have, here's what we have, and they go, whew, okay, now I see what you're talking about. People don't really know their current state as well as you think they do. Because many times in B2B, the current state is an amalgamation of many decisions that maybe came before them, have been team decisions, have been bolted together like Frankenstein's monster, so they can't even tell you what their current state looks like. But you've seen a lot of companies that look like them, so you can give them a pretty good generalized picture of the current state and then contrast it with the future recommended state. If you want them to be advocates, tell others, share, recommend, 12.5% increase if you put it in the contrast condition. You can move people significantly more just by adding the contrast. And product perceptions. You want to be perceived as innovative? You're way more innovative if you put your product in contrast to what they're doing today. So my question is, don't even need a show of hands. When you think about the content and messaging that you start to put out, and as you try to give people insights about things, how often do you first establish clearly the current state, the gaps, challenges, and deficiencies, and then show how what you're talking about actually addresses, attacks, and resolves that? Because if you're just telling them about the new and improved, you're not going to move them nearly as much. You're not going to incite them to change and leave status quo bias until you clearly depict the contrast between current and future state. So there's the numbers. Wouldn't you love to see your stuff work that much harder for you by making that one simple change? So that's your opportunity. The third one is concrete. You want people to take action. And so one of the things I've seen about insights these days that I'm struggling with is that a lot of people just light customers' hair on fire. You introduce some statistic that you think is like, woo, it's like going to make me crazy. I didn't see that coming, whoa. And you go to the market and you're like quoting stats, and you got a whole slide of stats, and you're like, oh man, we are putting them in so much pain. We are so insightful. So this thought that an insight is equivalent to you telling the market maybe some interesting, surprising, disrupting stat or factoid is not an insight. But a lot of people qualify that as an insight. We wanted to go out and test that because we always believed that to be true, but we went out and tested it. If you just light someone's hair on fire, are they going to emotionally respond and behaviorally respond to you the way you intended? Now, what I would tell you is there's some research out there that's equated with consumer fear-based methodologies. And what they've discovered is if you just introduce the uncertainty and don't resolve it in some way, you actually not only don't get a positive, you don't get a neutral, you actually get a negative. And I think there's some truth to that insights that are just surprising, excruciatingly painful factoids do not make me more interested in resolving them, do not connect me emotionally with you. I just think you're a jerk. It's like I've got open wounds and you just crunched up some potato chips and shoved them in there. At some level, what value did you bring by quoting a bunch of stats and factoids? You did not bring me insight. We wanted to test that. So the question was, does sharing surprising information that puts the prospect at unexpected risk drive more persuasion? Or does sharing surprising insight that puts the prospect at risk and then provides possible resolutions to that risk, is that more effective? So this is going to be hard to read in the back, but essentially, we took a study about vitamin D. Again, we had to do something that 500 people could respond to and understand quickly. But people are people, and Zach will tell you, B2B consumer, it doesn't matter. They're all humans using the same brain. So we lit their hair on fire. We said, did you know that up to 90% of Americans have some sort of vitamin D deficiency? Not if you live in Arizona, but if you live in Milwaukee, yes. It was snowing when I came here yesterday, hence the wool vest that I'm wearing in 90-degree weather. That's how I roll in Milwaukee. 90% of us have vitamin D deficiency, some form or another. Very dangerous condition, potentially serious side effects. Your body, this is what's interesting. To produce the amount of vitamin D that your body would require, you need to be in the sun without sunscreen between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. virtually every day to get that much, the amount of vitamin D. Now, you know there's consequences that go with that, right? So that has its own risks. 40% of Americans, as a result, now take supplements to help them get the vitamin D that they want. But did you know that you would actually need to take 10 times the amount of vitamin D supplement that you take in your standard dose in order to get the requirements that you need for vitamin D? And oh, by the way, when you go in the sun and you put sunscreen on, most of your sunscreen screens out the harmful, and it also screens out the vitamin D. So we told you a couple things you maybe didn't know. Maybe you knew you had a vitamin D problem, so you were taking supplements, but you didn't know your supplements weren't doing the job. And when you were out in the sun, you didn't realize that the sun wasn't even helping if you were using sunscreen. But not using sunscreen had its own risks. Oh my, what shall I do? Now at this point, we took a group of them and we started asking questions about their emotional response to this and their willingness to pursue remedies for this. And you'd think, man, this lit their hair on fire, they'd go want to do some stuff. The second group got to read then a second part of the equation. Fortunately, there are some very straightforward solutions that you can take. For example, there are new vitamin D supplements that provide substantially more vitamin D in them. There are vitamin D-rich foods that you can buy affordably and are readily available. And there's brand new sunblock out there that allows the vitamin D to penetrate. So we're in the business of trying to sell supplements and sunblock, in case you didn't know, not spinach. But we threw one in there to make sure that people knew it wasn't a big sales job. So, you follow me on that? Risk only, risk and solution. What happened? We measured emotional response. We asked them, how important to you personally was this information on vitamin D? Did you personally react to it? How important was this to your knowledge base? And when you read about the vitamin D in the study, how anxious did it make you about your own vitamin D intake? We had actually 3 groups that we did. We did risk only, and then we did a resolution only. We just had some people read some facts about some new things to improve their vitamin D intake, because we thought that would be interesting. And then the other group saw the risk and the resolution. Look at this difference. The emotional response was actually higher in a very material way when they read both the risk and the resolution. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for them to get engaged. You're looking for them to become emotionally involved, break through the status quo bias. But just introducing the risk had no statistically significant difference than just telling them about a new solution. Think about that when you put your messages together. Moving someone off of status quo bias is more potent when you introduce a risk, but then show them that there's a way to resolve it. An insight that incites them to emotionally respond contains both. If it just has the exciting statistic and factoids, you're no more effective than if you just put your solution out there for them. That's telling. The second thing then was behavioral intentions. How likely are you to change your behavior? How likely are you to take some action based on this? Would you be purchasing these supplements? How often would you eat these foods? Et cetera, et cetera. We wanted to know, will we move the needle? Will people change their behavior? Not quite the same level of number, but still statistically significant in the risk resolution approach. Your stories can be more powerful, 10 to 12% more powerful, if your insights introduce some sort of risk and then resolve that risk. You can move the status quo bias, but you won't if you just introduce the risk only. It's sort of counterintuitive, isn't it? So there's an opportunity here. There are 3 opportunities, I think, today that are now tested and proven, that if you want to be in the business of creating content that actually converts, you need to know the science behind conversion. And the brain science behind conversion would tell you people desire not to be converted. They prefer, in many ways, to stay in their status quo and have a heavy bias towards it. Unless you understand what those biases are and purposefully build messaging and content to address that, you're just building a bunch of content hoping it's going to work. And you're waiting for it to work, and you're waiting for the data to see if it works. But I prefer we all build content that we know will work before it goes out, not wait for the results. So here are 3 things you can take away from today. Introduce an unconsidered need first, and you will create a sense of urgency to change by destabilizing preferences and helping people see themselves begin to succeed. Compare their current versus future state. Show enough contrast so they see the value of making the change. Without the contrast, it's very difficult to choose to do something different because they don't believe you're that different from what they already do, the like factor. And be concrete. Don't just start their hair on fire, tell them some surprising statistic, and get them all riled up. That makes you a jerk. Resolve it with a solution that responds to those exact risks. And now you get someone taking action. Now you get somebody moving. Some of this content stuff has been treated like a quantity play when we know it should be a quality play. But I can tell you to create quality content, but what is quality? Who defines quality? How do you know when it's quality? I believe the science can actually tell us. That's why I go out and test it. So I've written about this in my latest book. I'm just told that there's 25 copies still at our booth. Those are free to the first 25 who can come and tell us the 3 C's. If you come up and say context, contrast, concrete, you'll get a free book where some of these studies are in there and more. So tomorrow when you build some content and people are in the room and they're like, I love this message, you're going to say, where's the context? Where's the unconsidered need that creates urgency? Where's the contrast between the current state and future state that shows people the value of making a change? And where's the risk and the resolution so that they know how to and begin to take an action? So that's what I wanted to give you today because I think it can make a difference not only in what your story is, but how you tell your story. And I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Some of you know my story about Malcolm Gladwell. I'm a little bit jealous because I'm giving my books away free. He actually makes you buy his. I'm also a little bit jealous because he charges $150,000 for a 1-hour speech. I charge Andrew way less. Neither of those things are corresponding or correlating to the value you're receiving. I'm just saying. But Gladwell wrote a book, the first book, and I loved it. It was The Tipping Point. It became the tipping point for his career. But what most people don't know, now that I've been talking about it more, some people do know, is that The Tipping Point was actually the product of a man named Morton Grodzins, a political scientist in Chicago, who identified the tipping point, researched the tipping point, proved the tipping point, published on the tipping point, named it the tipping point, for God's sake. This man was the first mover, and he did it 40 years before Gladwell's book. Gladwell sold us all, congratulations, a 40-year-old unoriginal idea. So if you think your product is commoditized, this dude was selling a 40-year-old unoriginal idea, and we bought it by the millions, pay him 6 figures for a speech, and we buy his books up. He just came up with his 6th book, David and Goliath. He's now ripping off God. But the difference, I tell you this difference is they both had the product. He even had the head start. So many marketers and salespeople are like, I wish our product people would just give us an innovation I could talk about. Don't wait for that. Because Gladwell proves That it doesn't require differentiation in your product, it just requires differentiation in your story. Gladwell messaged it great. So he's rich and famous. He died in academic obscurity. I've given you 3 ways to improve your message, so tomorrow's your choice. Are you going to be Gladwell or are you going to be Grodsons? Thank you very much.